Welcome to the Vitruvian Man podcast. This is your host, Vinamre Kasanaa. In this podcast, we cover the human form in all its mental and physical glory. Today I have my good friend, Adrian Thomas. Adrian is a bona fide journalist at Boston University, and he's actually got a couple of awesome things in his credentials, including being the director of one of WTBU's, which is BU's radio station, top shows, BU in the Morning. He's also worked with Sirius XM Radio, where he was responsible for working on production for Andy Cohen Live. And he's also been the co-editor-in-chief of Verge Campus Media, which is a big college publication, pretty famous across the United States, where he interviewed a lot of artists and just explored the musical talents of the US. And finally, recently, he was working with Panda Radio UK, which is a UK-based radio station, I believe. He was responsible for writing the Daily News Bulletin. His storytelling skills are obviously impeccable. Without further ado, let's begin. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
man.
happy to be here.
All right, so we're going to do a couple of questions, but I really want to ask you about storytelling because that's something that fascinates me. I mean, I've always been fascinated by just the idea of being able to stream together events and then create a narrative and then form a story so that it's accessible to generations. One of the things that I think about often is, like if the articulated voices of our generation often shape culture. Like, even if that voice is a rap star, and even if that voice is a journalist, it's all about shaping culture in a way. So I guess the first question that I want to ask you is, like, stories are all around us, man. Like, everywhere from the way humans were created, the earth, creation myths, those are stories, to the sort of identity politics and kind of narratives that exist around people's identities today. So, and they all have one thing in common, which is one narrative that binds a whole people. So you've done a lot of different things. You've created content for various different platforms and various different mediums. What got you into this?
I think it goes back to when I was very young. I was just always naturally very curious about the world around me. I was fortunate enough to have parents who were very vocal with me even when I was a toddler and really young.
How so?
So, it was just a matter of when I was young, I would ask my parents about, their lives before I was born, and they would tell me all about it. I mean, it could be anything from, the towns that they grew up in, to the music they listened to the political events that happened when they were kids, and things like that. So it was just a natural curiosity that I had that was really just kind of inadvertently encouraged by my parents just through a lot of our conversations that we had. I think about one of the earliest times, one of my earliest memories of watching news and consuming a lot of media was in the 2000 election between George Bush and Al Gore. I didn't quite understand what was going on. I mean, granted, it was 2000. I was
3 years old, 4 years old.
I was 4.5, 5.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, I was just fascinated by it. I was fascinated by the whole. Did not really quite understand what was going on, but I was just fascinated by the idea of, wow, what's an election? What is this major event going on? Why everyone's paying attention to it, and just observing around me how everyone was so into what was going on.
Yeah.
That was just something that I thought was fascinating. Even at such a young age, I didn't quite understand it, and obviously, it's built and built and built since then. Especially in high school, that's kind of when I started to really build on my passions more, getting involved with different student media at my high school and things like that. It's just kind of been something that's been with me my whole life. And just to sum it up, it's just been I just have a huge curiosity about the world around me and the people in it.
That's really fascinating, man. One of the things that you said was how people were entranced almost by that big event that was happening. I can imagine 18 years ago watching an election is that is the event. That is what people are going to focus on. It's livelihood also stops in some senses, right? And the notion of day trading attention, just like basically, I think of it now like in 2018. I mean, attention is currency. Everyone's on their devices. Everyone's glued to some kind of media outlet. Everyone's like getting information, like you said, consuming content. That leap from voraciously consuming content, being fascinated by it, to now creating content, and that too for like anywhere from I saw your interviews with different political personalities, and then there's a whole music part of it.
Yeah.
Those are two really disparate elements, the politics and the music. So I mean, I guess my question to you is, as a layman, it's often difficult to stream together what seems like only facts and to create them and present them in a way that it gives you a cohesive picture so that it's a story. How do you go about knowing that what is a story and what qualifies as a story and what's not?
That's a really good question. It all kind of comes down to, what are you trying to get across in the conversation that you're having? If I'm interviewing a city councilor, a Boston city councilor about affordable housing, I've done a story on that before. If it's a subject like that, it's you kind of want to put yourselves in the shoes of the person you're interviewing, and think like, okay, what are these people's goals, and what's their mission, and what can I learn from that?
Right.
So by putting yourself in their shoes before you ask them the questions, while you're asking them the questions, that's where you really get the story from. And it goes back to what I said about how humans just kind of have a natural curiosity about learning about one another, and learning about different facets of our daily existence. And there's a lot that can be learned from any type of story, whether it's something more hard news and political or something more entertainment and artistic. I've interviewed a lot of artists, and that's something I'm very, very passionate about. I think you can learn a lot about the world by showcasing art and celebrating art, specifically musicians, because even though I've talked to a lot of artists who are of pretty similar genres, whether that's hip hop artists, pop artists, producers, DJs, whatever, there's still, each person kind of has their own story. And with music, people put their whole lives and their emotion and their whole mental capacity into this one thing that they're creating. And so that in and of itself, that tells a huge story. I think back to an artist I interviewed. He's Haitian, and he's from, he's born in the Boston area, but was born to Haitian parents.
Right.
His name was Guy Claude Lacosed, and he randomly, my sophomore year was on BU in the morning. He came with like another artist that we were interviewing. He just came with this other artist. But he like whipped out his guitar and he like played one of his songs, and I was fascinated by him. And I thought that he just had a lot of talent. I could tell his emotion that he was putting into his music was very authentic. And then I profiled him for Verge Campus, and that was like a whole in-depth profile. And like what I learned through him was not only did I learn more about his music, but I learned a lot about the background to what he was putting into his music. His kind of conflicting identity of growing up in America but being 100% Haitian, and kind of combining the Haitian elements of his life into his music and integrating it. And that was just really fascinating to me, because I learned about a different country and culture that I otherwise really wouldn't have known much about. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, going back to your original question again, I think it's a matter of putting yourself in the shoes of whatever subject your story is about.
Yeah.
And just kind of seeing it from their perspective.
Right. Okay, because I did read. I briefly glanced at the one you did with the lead singer of Glass Animals.
Yes, Dave
and,
Bailey.
and that's a pretty prominent band to say the least. At least in the United States, I know one of my roommates went to their concert. He loved it. There's a huge following for them. So when you bring someone like that who's already established, who has let's just say a repertoire in their background, how do you know what questions to ask? Like, how do you know like if this would appeal to them, or do you? I mean, what I'm really asking you to break down. I know it's hard. Is kind of the process behind. You already have the subject, so that's okay. The process behind asking them what sort of questions you want to ask them, and then kind of seeing where the questions will take you. And then the third thing is the audience for which you're asking those questions, because I feel like that's something that I don't know about, at least, because I'm not a journalism major per se, but I definitely think that journalism is about, let's just say, pursuing the truth and then reporting it, right, and then verifying the truth also, right. So when you get someone from the entertainment industry who's made a big name for themselves, how do you still bring out their other side? Because you can go in as an entertainment show host who does not have a degree in journalism, by the way, so they can kind of ask them like trivia questions and stuff, right? And then, oh, what's your favorite thing? Blah 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 blah, right? But as someone who has a journalism background, you definitely have an affinity for finding the story beneath the story. So, I guess how do you do that?
So, with an artist like Dave Bailey from Glass Animals, and it's an very accomplished artist. I've had the opportunity to interview some other fairly accomplished people in the music industry. And when you talk to people like that, yeah, you have their latest music that you're plugging, you have their tour that you're plugging, things like that. But with people like that, I think what's really effective is when you talk to them about kind of the origin of everything.
Right.
The origin of their sound. What was your first gig? What was that like? What was going through your head? What's been one of the most eye-opening experiences as a band? Ask them about their relationships when their close circle, like with their family members, with significant others, and how their identity as an artist plays into that. I think it's just a matter of being casual and candid, and asking them about kind of just basic human things, really.
Yeah.
And kind of tying that into their work.
I see. Yeah, because that makes sense, because if you just ask them like, oh, what's your album about, and blah blah blah, you just kind of get this promotional feel to it.
Yeah.
Whereas you want to bring out the humanness of someone, and I feel like that's primarily the reason why people like Dave Bailey come to shows like yours is to have the chance to be more candid about stuff that they would not have the opportunity to talk about, say, in a more, I don't know, like an MTV kind of outlet, right? Where it's more like the trivia kind of stuff. But I do want to move on and talk to you about like the current state of media, because
there's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot to talk about that, of course. So I believe, and since I'm not from the U.S., so correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution says that the government or any of its affiliates shall not interfere with the opinions.
Do you want me to just recite it?
For sure, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So,
I think I just mentally came.
Yeah. So yeah, the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law. So Congress doesn't make any law that silences the press.
Having said that, though,
that's the thing. Our First Amendment, the words are very powerful, but proceed with what you were going to ask me.
I was going to ask you,
because let's look at where we're at right now.
I was going to ask you. So, despite that law, I think it goes without saying that when we say Congress, we have to include, say, arguably the most powerful man in the world as a part of it. At least, if you're, let's just say, like, to name drop here, Donald Trump, right? If you are the head of a country, right, and the Constitution says that you must not interfere or move public opinion in a certain way about a really important pillar of a democracy, and which is media, right? Donald Trump fires away tweets that say, CNN is fake news, and all of that, everything is fake news. Fuck the mainstream media is a popular one again. With so much criticism coming in toward media from really at the top, someone who has the potential and actively uses that potential to frame opinion, there's a skepticism about mainstream media. People are now skeptic about facts, which is something journalism is grounded in. People are skeptical about news stories. People are skeptical about this term, which seemed to emerge out of nowhere, fake news. So with all this criticism and dissent almost that's happening, how do you still deliver the news, man? Like,
Yeah.
and feel free to rant if you want.
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think I think what the biggest thing is that truth and facts, this sounds simple, but they're real, they're tangible, they're right in front of your face. And unfortunately, we're living in a time right now where, because we have access to so much information
Information overload, rather.
on our phones,
Yeah.
and on our laptops, and we're just getting bombarded with it constantly.
Yeah.
A lot of people, because that information is coming to them so quickly and so easily, they view that as truth. And it's just it's a problem. It is such a problem. I mean, you look at the election, you look at all the problems that happened. It was there were so many just illegitimate websites and platforms that were perpetuating stories that had no fact or any sort of basis in truth. And I just, I think it's one of those things that we have to believe in our institutions. We have to believe in our fellow man. And that's where truth comes from. And there's an onslaught on facts and truth right now by one of the most powerful people in the country, if not the world. I do think, though, that just as many people who believe the president and his antics, there's just as many people who don't and who believe in truth. So I don't think there's going to be some like rapture or anything like that. But we are in an age right now where a lot of people are just not consuming media intelligently. My mom, she is an English teacher, middle school English teacher. And one of the electives she taught in her first couple years at the school she teaches at now back in Indiana was a class called Media Literacy. And it was about...
Media literacy.
Media literacy, yes.
That's really interesting.
And so what media literacy was about was pretty much being media literate. Which sources of news and media are legitimate, which aren't. Facts being backed up with sources, and things like that. And it's shocking. A lot of people in this country are not media literate. And it's scary to think about, but that's where we're at right now. But I think media literacy is a very important issue right now, and a lot of people just aren't media literate. So again, when you're delivering the news, it's just a matter of being persistent with the facts, showing the evidence, and just not backing down.
Yeah, but I hate to play the I hate to play the devil's advocate here.
Keep
but
play the devil's advocate.
But I do believe that the injection of the term alternative facts. And I know it's a really controversial, polarizing term, but it does kind of imprint on even the most rational, media literate person's mind a doubt about the source that they're consuming the media from. You know, because I mean, I see it like this. So now what's happening is that there's so many news outlets. First of all, we're not consuming news. You're a journalism major, so you would obviously consume news in a more formulaic sense than the average person, which is, you skim through your Facebook on your commute to work, or you check your phone as you're eating food, and you kind of scroll through all the stuff that comes in front of you. And there's algorithms on social media now in which if you consume one kind of news channel, it will not present you with contrasting evidence or news. It will often use the algorithms in a way so that if you're consuming, let's just say, ultra right-wing news, then that's the thing that you will see again and again and again, right? So what I see now is the reason why I say alternative facts is like, it's really easy to be caught in the polarizing whirlwind of one kind of news. And with things like alternative facts, like I bring the question back to you in the sense that even in journalism, I think one of the really interesting things I like about it is that when you read a news story, right? For example, a man killed a family of two, but the family of two was, let's just say, psychopaths, right? Let's just assume, let's go far away and assume that, right? So it comes down to morals, right? Because when you report that story, you write down articles. First, you start off with, okay, there was a killing. This man killed these people, right? And then you give kind of the testimonies of that man, but then you expose another side and say, well, these people also had this thing to say, right? So it's like there's two truths. There's not one singular universal truth. And the journalist's job is to find that or the closest approximation to that truth and bring it to the public. But now with the polarization, now with the alternative facts, it's like more difficult than ever. I don't know. Could you talk more about that? Because that's something that I definitely face. Like even the most prominent news articles, news outlets that come on my newsfeed, I look at them with skepticism, more so than I had done in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. That is a really good question. So what you're asking is how do we what steps do we take to bring the most, I guess, authentic truth forward?
Yeah. And what is it even?
And so you're asking me as like from the journalist perspective.
From the journalist perspective, not from the public perspective.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to, again, is the journalist in question, do they have political leanings? Are they trying to push a certain message? And we're unfortunately in an age of a lot of that right now. But most good journalists are not like that.
Okay.
Again, it kind of goes back to what I said, that, our institutions, public records, it's all out there. All the truth is out there. And as long as you perpetuate that and are persistent, that's just what you have to go on. And you have to be persistent. And even in the wake of people doubting you and saying that you're fake news, as long as you have the evidence, that's all you really can do.
Yeah, it's like that new Nike ad with Colin Kaepernick. I don't know if you watched that. It's like, stand up for something, even if it means sacrificing everything, which is kind of what he did also. I see that. So you're saying that is in this time of fake news, a journalist who supposedly represents the truth must be persistent, and hope that even if he or she or they can make a dent in the psyche toward a direction which they feel like is truthful, then they've done their job, right? But I would like to move on to a more pressing subject now. It's like, so now obviously we talked a bunch about smartphones and like how everyone's like consuming information all the time, right? You've had a lot of newsroom experience yourself, right? One of the statistics that I read was that the newsroom is dying in the U.S., with newsroom jobs being decreased by 23%. And it implies that visual storytelling, which is now only restricted to social media platforms such as Facebook, you've got Instagram stories, you've got Instagram videos. Now that's going to translate in the newsroom as well. So more artists and photographers will have jobs in mainstream news outlets than regular anchors or orators. Could you talk about that? Are you aware of that?
Yeah, that's really great that you bring that up, because that's something that that I have that I have noticed as a journalism student in this day and age, who's kind of on the tail end of his university career. I'm graduating early in December. Yeah, there's definitely kind of an ongoing evolution of sorts with journalism and media. A lot of, especially just me from my own experience, broadcast media, I think is something that is, in the next 10 years, it's going to look very different than it is now. Right now we still have a lot of, local news stations and local radio and things like that, and kind of stuff that's very kind of set in tradition. And I have noticed that even in some of my classes, just certain, like, stylistically, like how one should sound on camera, how one should frame a certain story. There is a big structure to it all, which is still good because it's very established. It's been successful, obviously. But because of the advent of multimedia, smartphones, social media, the way in which media is conveyed and consumed is going to change. And nobody really knows what that's going to look like. But all I can say is that, media outlets, publications, they just need to adapt. They just need to adapt to the times. And the ones that adapt to the times are going to remain successful and continue to create informative, entertaining content. And those that don't adapt are not going to do well.
Talking about content, what sort of stories inspire you? Like, what is something that you specifically like to chase and present to the world?
I think there's two. I think there's two avenues that inspire me. Firstly, one is I love music journalism. That's definitely something that I've just discovered a passion for in college.
Yeah.
I just think it's really inspiring to talk to someone who's put their heart and soul behind something creative and is putting that out there for the world to see. And
it's so vulnerable.
And you're showcasing that.
Yeah.
You're letting that person be vulnerable with you and take you to some really happy places in their life, but also take you to some really dark places in their life. Yeah. And then how that all factors into their art that they create. So that's very inspiring to me. Another thing that really inspires me too is, when I meet someone from a different country or culture or a different background than me, even if it's somebody who, they don't have to be from somewhere else, but just somebody who has a different background story, different backstory than me. And if their life has had trial and tribulations and they're here now in front of me telling me about that, that's something that I find very inspiring. And it could be anything. My most recent news story I wrote was about this synagogue in Belmont. It's a suburb right outside of Boston.
I'm aware of that, yeah.
And the synagogue there has a group that helps refugees and immigrants when they from all over the world when they come to the Boston area to resettle. And I spoke to a woman from Afghanistan who came here with her family, and that was fascinating because and that was so inspiring to me because, she and her husband and 2 kids, they're here, they're living a normal life now, but they had to literally drop everything in Afghanistan and come here
Wow.
And so, it's very interesting for me to just, again, you put yourself in the shoes of other people. So I don't know. It's inspiring to me when, I'm doing a story on someone, something, or an event of some sort, or a group of people who experienced, some form of trial and tribulations, and they've prevailed, or maybe they haven't prevailed yet and they're still fighting.
Yeah.
I also think with storytelling too, your own personal experiences can factor in to how you receive people, to how you listen to people.
Interesting.
I lost my dad in February. He had a brain tumor.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. It happened very, very fast. It was just something that came on literally within 6 months of him being diagnosed. He was gone. It was very hard. But it almost makes you a more compassionate storyteller when you have a personal experience to kind of use as a home base. It doesn't necessarily have to be loss, but I mean, it could be any personal experience. And I think if you can, again, kind of go back to those moments in that experience of yours, it can really help you relate to other people and be a compassionate storyteller.
I love that, man. That was really inspiring.
Thank you.
That I lost my voice. That was something.
Thank you. I don't know if I was rambling there.
No, I love that. It brought out something that was unexpected and delightful, to say the least. Because, I mean, I never thought of it like that. When I think about storytelling, I think about it as something you can learn from a course on Coursera. You can learn by understanding how the plot of a novel works. It's like, you've got the beginning, the premise, you've got the protagonist in that premise, you've got what the protagonist wants, then you've got a conflict, right? The protagonist goes up, fighting through conflicts, finally you reach the climax, where either he or she gets what they want, or more shit gets locked in their way. And then in the end, as after the climax, the protagonist is transformed, and you find this sort of catharsis, or the lack of a catharsis, like you mentioned with the family, the Afghani family. Are they still struggling? Is this a story set in a particular moment in time, something that you want to update later on in the future? You want to leave people with that sort of feeling of dissatisfaction, but something that's real and grounded in the human experience? Or do you want to also show the happy ending, or a ending at all, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and the thing is too, I just want to stress that everybody has their own experiences that they can go off of. You don't have to have lost a family member. You don't have to have, fled your country or anything like that. Everybody goes through raw human emotion, raw human experiences. And I think as a storyteller, no matter what your content is, no matter what platform you're on, go off your personal experiences. It's kind of like going with your gut.
I love that. It's so interesting because nowadays, especially with the sort of influencers and thought leaders that you follow in these industries, there's an evident kind of preaching of formulas and algorithms, and here's how to increase our outreach, which is great. That's great. That's the technical side. Having a bigger audience matters. But the key thing now, especially with the advent of social media, is that everyone's a digital marketer, everyone's a self-help guru, everyone's a journalist, everyone's a social media model, everyone is a storyteller. And I love that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But like you said, you don't see the person behind the story. All you see is a bunch of logarithms and techniques and gimmicks to get them to a level. But the reason why a lot of people, especially young people who start off with daring ventures in the new media, fail, and I've experienced some of this my own, is because they believe that to make it in this space, you can just get by with these tools that these people give to you. But what's often left out, and that's what I love about journalism, is the pursuit of truth. And if you bring that pursuit of truth within yourself, if you like direct that energy within yourself, that itself will reflect in your work, and that's going to create a way more potent piece of work. Have like I was just reading this quote today in this online journal called Brain Pickings, and it said that if you write deeply from within yourself, and if you write things that really interest you, forget what you've been influenced by, forget what people say works, but if you really, even if that is something like, like having, like collecting weird furniture, right? If that's something that you're really passionate about, and you do all of that, and you put in your passion day in and day out, I mean, it's like, it takes 2 months and people will start sucking your dick. Yeah. And I find that fascinating because, like, even with this podcast, I was like, I can go in and I can start talking about, like, oh, blah, 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 where are you from, what's your story, but, like, what's something that really drives me? Mm-hmm. And it's that sort of appreciation and manic pursuit of excellence. And when I say excellence, it's a really broad term. I've been really into self-development and personal growth, and I felt like, what is the better epitome of that than the Vitruvian Man, which is, the perfect human form. But yeah, that's fascinating, man. I do want to kind of start wrapping things up, so I want to ask you about the current state of media, which is, so like we already discussed, broadcast journalism is dying, mainstream media is, people are skeptical.
Well, you say broadcast journalism is dying?
Is that inaccurate?
It's not dying, it's just evolving. I mean, there's kind of, it's like I said earlier, there's some traditional styles, and it just needs to adapt a little bit. You know?
Okay.
But I know what you're saying, though. I don't watch like
TV.
Traditional
people I know don't watch TV.
Yeah, I know. That's why it needs to adapt.
Yeah. Exactly. So I mean, there's a lot, but that's the thing that I want to stress on is, like, you're a journalist, right? And oftentimes, I could be wrong, this is my layperson's view of it. Is established disciplines like law and journalism don't adapt as fast to changing technology. Think about the Joe Rogan Experience as a podcast, right? It's long form content. It's videographed. Mm-hmm. You can also hear the audio, but it's 3 hours of content, right? And not everyone who watches TV would be interested in watching that. So journalism is changing so much. People are interested in long form content, but then there's also like this sect of people who are all about just skimming through the stuff, highlights, summaries, audiobook summaries, skims, listicles, all of that. Mm-hmm. So there's this. It's kind of like a contrary thing where long form content is also rising, but skim content is also rising. And you're someone who's done radio shows, who's done TV, who's done articles, who's done like interviews. What's like the one platform or like the one medium where you can really like strike gold?
I think
for you personally.
For me personally.
Yeah.
For me personally, I think streaming content is where everything is headed, and is where it's all at right now. Whether the streaming content is video, whether it's audio, or if it's like multimedia. I think stuff that people can pull out their phone and watch or listen to, open up their laptop and watch and listen to, streaming. I think that's where everything's at right now. It's why Netflix is every year it just gets bigger and bigger. More subscriptions, more shows, bigger budget. I think any type of streaming content, that's where it's at right now.
Are you taught that in your classroom though? Because
No.
Journalism academia has not evolved.
No, I would say no. I will say there is a good effort right now for evolving and journalism professionals who are college professors, they understand that and they are making a very good effort. With every profession you still need to learn like the fundamentals and the basics and what you get at a good school like BU, specifically College of Communication.
Which is shit on all the time.
It is by the rest of the BU community.
Which is not true at all. Actually, like, fun fact about comm, 2015 is when you got in, 2015 is when I got in. It has a personal admission rate of about 12 or 13%.
Yeah.
Which you can get into the College of General Studies at BU really easily, but to get into comm is actually way tougher. It's like one of the top 10 journalism and film TV schools.
And yes, and it goes back to what you said about, we're not like necessarily taught that idea of like, okay, streaming and on-demand content are where things are going. Mm-hmm. That's kind of just my view. Yeah. I wasn't really taught that. That's just something I've just kind of picked up myself.
Yeah.
But a lot can be, especially with journalism and media, it is important to kind of have those core skills.
Yeah.
And I would not have got those anywhere else other than the journalism department at BU. I've really been educated very well in just kind of the basic craft of storytelling. And also, even though, there's some things in my classes where, I learned these basics and some of this other stuff I've kind of just picked up on my own. Mm-hmm. Having the class as a base allowed me to kind of explore those different avenues for myself.
Because you had sure footing.
Yes, yeah. And, all the other opportunities that I've been able to immerse myself in wouldn't have happened had I not been at BU. One of my... you had to take this as an advertising major, right? Yeah. So, Com 201?
I have taken it,
yeah. So
Introduction to Communication Writing.
Yes. Yeah. So, my professor who I had for that, Jay Atkinson, one of my favorite professors I've ever had, we're pretty close, talked to him a lot. So I had him my second semester, and one of the things he talked about, at one point in the semester was, he actually said this a few times throughout the semester. He was like, it's kind of like a silly analogy, but like it makes a lot of sense. It's like college is like an iceberg. The part above the water that's exposed, it's like a formidable size. Yeah. You can see it, but the big part is what's underneath.
I love that.
But it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And that's how I felt about my journalism and media education experiences. I've got these core values, but I use those core values to then explore a lot of different opportunities and learn a lot on my own. And honestly, I think that's what college is for. I mean, you're not going to learn everything in your classes.
Absolutely not.
But yeah. Going back to what you originally said, streaming, where it's all at.
I love that, man. It's not a silly analogy at all, because it makes sense. I was having a discussion with my friend. I was actually having a discussion with Madhav, who's filming the video right now. I was like, you gotta escape the BU bubble if you want to experience something, because you're always in an echo chamber of. You can say, well, there's some diversity. I mean, of course, like on paper, but like diversity of opinion, by the way. There's some diversity of opportunity. There's some multiple perspectives, but remember that it's still a certain square kilometer radius of people who have paid to stay in that radius, right? And then they're being educated. But it's like, you get the theory here, but if you don't implement that theory, which is to say that you go outside that bubble and you expand that, it's like field test your assumptions. If you don't test those assumptions, if you don't go and get your assumptions crushed or fortified in the outside world, you don't really learn. And then once you're out of college, it's harsher for you, especially if you did not realize that you were living in a bubble. Then it's like you're almost pushed out of the womb of your mother for the third time. The first time is when you enter college, then the third time, the first time is when you actually are born, and the second time is when you enter college, and the third time is you leave it, right? But so last final question. As someone who's interested in stories, period, as someone who's interested in the pursuit of truth, and as someone who does not have a journalism degree, what's one thing that can help them stand out?
So for someone who doesn't have like a journalistic education,
yes.
In terms of their content standing out. Their content, the stories they tell.
The stories they tell, the content they create,
Do it from a point of compassion. You know, do it from a point of compassion where you obviously, yeah, you look at what's in it for you.
Uh-huh.
You want to create captivating content,
Right.
but you also want to help others, to entertain others, to inform others.
Yeah.
So look at it as almost like a thing where you're helping others.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because it actually, when you're telling stories, like I think about tribe rituals where, tribes would sit down around the fire and the village elder would tell the story. It's not for the purpose of getting reverence, which they do get because they're elder, but it's more for informing opinion.
Yeah.
Planting the seed in someone's head, and it's so crazy, like, I mean, when you're in that position, when you can really say something and it becomes a seed for someone else's whole life, that is a really scary but awesome job, because the level of responsibility on your shoulders is, I mean, do you want to talk more about that?
No, I think it's cool that you say that's a very scary but awesome responsibility, and you're absolutely right, because there are a lot of people in this world who who are their thoughts and their mindsets are very malleable. I mean, everybody is kind of at a point like that in their life at some point, whether they're very young or maybe they've been through something where they're totally rethinking their whole life. Humans are naturally impressionable, so you're absolutely right. It's a being an effective storyteller. It's an important responsibility, but yeah, if it's clearly in this day and age right now, there's been some scary things.
Yeah.
But no, like to sum everything up, I think media and storytelling and this whole landscape, it's going to evolve for the better, and like I said, the good storytellers are going to prevail. There's going to be a persistence of sticking to truth and facts, and ultimately that will all come out on top at the end of the day.
Awesome, man. I do want to leave the viewers with this rather dismal lyric from a Jim Morrison song, which I just recall because you mentioned how young people are malleable. So the song is called The Ghost Song, and he says, "Ghosts crowd the young child's fragile eggshell mind." And he's basically referring to how, well, it's a theme in, like, when you're young and you're impressionable, you if you get subjected to persuasive speakers, but their intention is malicious, then you become them. And so this is Adrian Thomas. He's here in the pursuit of truth, multimedia, content, journalism, everything. Do you have a Twitter or like some social media handle?
Yes, at Adrian B. Thomas on Twitter, Instagram at Adrian B. _Thomas.
That's Adrian B. Thomas?
Yes.
Okay, just follow him there. Pursuit of Truth, my man at BU, and we're checking out now. See you next week. Sayonara.